My wife said to me one time that if I'm fasting without prayer, it's a bit like having a curry without the sauce.
Ramadan, it's more than just a month. It's a journey of the soul, a journey of the heart, a journey of the self. It's one of the five main pillars of our religion, of our deen, of Islam. It's usually a time where we focus on our fasting, our prayer, and our dhikr. But imagine going through Ramadan for the very first time. Welcome to My First Ramadan, and today we are here with Dr. Glenn Williams, also known as Haji Bilal Abdullah, a man who embraced Islam in the year 1999 in the United Kingdom, at a time where Islam was not very popular in the UK. I'm very glad and honored to welcome to our platform Dr. Glenn Williams. Doctor, welcome.
Thank you.
So, Doctor, before we get into your story, tell us a little bit more about yourself.
So someone who we grew up in the UK for a little while. I moved to South Africa with my sister and parents from the age of 6 to 16, and then I came back to the UK where I did my A-levels, and then I lived in Leicester, where I came into contact with a variety of people from all over the different cultures and faiths. And then I moved down to Surrey and then started working in London, and that's where I became a lot more aware of faiths such as Islam. And it was around 1999, as you've said, that I embraced Islam.
So, Doctor, how was life before Islam, pre-1999?
So before Islam, pre-1999, I would be someone who was probably, I would say, a little bit, not necessarily wild. I wasn't drinks, drugs, and rock and roll, but I was definitely someone who a fair bit, who was someone who guided in terms of a particular faith. And I was someone who, I was more hedonistic. I was focusing on the pleasures rather than the purpose of my life.
How long was that period of discovering Islam?
So that's a really good question, because I spent 2 years researching and coming into contact with those who knew about Islam. So it was something which was very much a journey for me. It was something which was a spiritual experience of the educational variety. And so I was reading lots of books. I was listening to tapes at the time. These were audio tapes because they're a lot more common in 1999. And I was coming into contact with people who had grown up with Islam primarily. I was shown how to pray. I learned a lot more about the beautiful things that can come from being a Muslim. So, yes, it took me quite some time, really, before I took my Shahada.
And what was the spark that interested you in Islam in the first place? Was it by chance, or was it through your research or the people that you met?
It was primarily the people I met, and then that triggered me to then do the research. And that's one of the reasons why I was looking at the new name of Bilal Abdullah for my reverted state, because I thought that would be something that signifies a little bit about my personality. So prior to converting to Islam, I was someone who enjoyed singing. Music was very much something that spoke to my soul. And I liked the sound. I loved the person who took on the role of the Bilal for the call to prayer. And so that's something that fitted my personality. So I think that there's enough things there that really lined up nicely to my reverted state.
And I would assume that you already had an idea of what Ramadan was before you became a Muslim then.
That's a good question. Actually, I didn't, because I hadn't had too much contact with Muslims prior to the middle of the 1990s onwards. So I had more contact with people of other faiths, Hinduism, Sikhism, Buddhism, and so on. So it was a bit of a shock, really, to me. It was a huge culture shock. And it was quite overwhelming to see what was needed to be done in terms of abstaining from food and drink. But it's only after I reverted that I realized that Ramadan is more than abstinence from food and drink. And that was really quite a good learning spiritual experience for me.
Doctor, you brought in a very good point that before you were Muslim, Ramadan was only abstaining from food and drink, and that after you embraced Islam, the perception of Ramadan completely changed. What changed?
Well, I suppose it was to do with taking part in Ramadan and then learning from others, such as talking to my wife, that she told me things that I hadn't realized. I thought that all I need to do was just try and make sure I stay away from the temptations of food and drink. I'm trying to be a good Muslim. And yet my wife was saying to me, and also a few other people that I was talking with, that it is trying to do other things as well. It's trying to make sure that I do charitable deeds, so sadaqah. I also look at what I can do to refrain from backbiting and slander, so gossip. So it's something that I really needed to learn a little bit more about. But the other thing as well, which was so crucial, was the importance of ibadah, particularly prayer, because I thought that it's all to do with food and drink. So it's just making sure that I just do it a little bit like dieting, but it's not. It's a whole body and whole spirit. And my wife said to me one time that if I'm fasting without prayer, it's a bit like having a curry without the sauce. It's a bit like just having the rice. It's not really got that sustenance that makes me feel nourished. So that's something that was a real eye-opener to me. And I never would have known that unless I'd actually taken part and really gone through the marathon, that month-long fast of Ramadan.
So your first Ramadan, you had a support system around you already who could teach you and guide you through the month, is what you're saying.
In a sense, I had some friends. I was yet to get married then, so it's just what I was doing was learning from some friends. But primarily, you have to bear in mind, as you said earlier on, that it wasn't in a climate where fasting was that open in terms of the being Muslim and proud and letting people know that I'm fasting. So my first Ramadan, no one really knew when I was at work that I was fasting, apart from one of my colleagues, Faisal Ahmed, who helped me with the reversion process with my Shahada. So a few colleagues knew, and also Aisha Khan, who I was also working with, she also helped me through with the reversion process as well. So I had a couple of colleagues, but I didn't, during the holy month of Ramadan, I wasn't always mixing with them. So I was kind of doing it by myself every now and then. So it was quite a struggle.
So Doctor, I want you to bring me to the year 1999, the night before your first day of Ramadan. Could you share with me that process? I think that point must have been very significant for you, you preparing for your first day of fasting or your first day of experiencing Ramadan. So bring me back to that day, that moment. Was it summer? Was it winter?
Yes, it was quite a scary process for me. It was winter, so it was in November. And the first day of fasting was me traveling to a work conference. So I was traveling up to Harrogate in North England. And yes, it was quite a struggle, really, not to turn to having a coffee whilst I'm traveling up on the train, or when we had the meetings with the delegates, not to then turn to some food. So doing my best to stay away from those temptations. And when people were mixing around lunchtime, then I had to just go away and have some peace and quiet away from that as well. So yes, the night before, I was very nervous. And as I said, I had quite a lot of other work commitments as well. And I think this is where I had not really learned, and probably until my first few Ramadans, about the true significance of trying to do it with whole body and spirit rather than just trying to abstain from food and drink. So the first time was not as good as it could have been, I suppose.
But if you look back at Dr. Glenn Williams of 1999 and 2000, I think the Dr. Williams of 2025 is a completely different man.
Very much so, yes. I've learned a lot, and it's also been one where it's been a little bit easier to do fasting, even when it was longer hours. So as you know, in the UK, we get quite long summers, so it made it easier when I was doing the prayers alongside the fasting. Then I was less focused on, oh, my tummy hurts, I've not got any food or drink in it. I was a lot more focused on ibadah, and it felt like the time flew by. I was a lot more focused on important things. Whereas the early years of fasting, it was something that I was just doing what I could do to get by and just to manage. And it was really, really challenging. And you mentioned about the contrast between 1999 me and then 2025 me. I'm a lot more focused on the reasons for fasting. And if my stomach is a little bit painful when I'm fasting, I actually realize there are a lot of other people that find it difficult to get the nourishment they need every day. So it makes me a lot more mindful of those who are suffering through a variety of reasons, whether it's through poverty, whether it's through inequality, all those kinds of things. So a little bit of discomfort is really a small thing compared to some of the challenges people face.
So, Doctor, one thing that I picked up earlier from what you said was that the first day of your fasting, of you experiencing Ramadan, you were away on a work trip to the north of England. And I think, I assume that you are someone who is very career-oriented, who has dedicated many hours into the craft that you are perfecting in your area of research. So what adjustments did you have to do to your daily routine or your daily workspace for you to prepare for Ramadan? I mean, you have sahur, you have iftar, you have tarawih. You know, you naturally want to do more reading of the Quran, be more mindful, embark in more zikr, for example. So how adjust your day as a new Muslim?
So for the first days of Ramadan, I wasn't doing it in a very mindful and informed way. So you mentioned about doing the shuhur, the pre-dawn meal. What I was doing was waking up a little bit later, not having the food, and then just seeing if I can struggle on, which wasn't very wise and not very good for the body. And if you scan forward to 2025, there's a lot more of an awareness that I need to do fasting really a lot more cleverly. I need to look after my body, but also need to make sure, as I mentioned earlier on, performing ibadah, I need to make sure that I do the shuhur, I can do the fajr, and that I can manage to find times throughout the day to perform the other four prayers during that day as well. So I think it's, and in terms of iftar, it's trying to find times as well to break my fast with my wife or with colleagues or friends. So it is a bit easier. Whereas I think, as I said, in my first Ramadan, I was struggling trying to do it by myself. As I said, I had some friends. They were really helpful in terms of advice and support, but it was very much me doing what I could to get by. So I think the preparation was something that was left to be desired. You have to bear in mind that in November, the hours of daylight were a lot shorter, which might seem then a good thing. And I think in a way I was just trying to push myself through that daily marathon rather than focusing on the purpose of Ramadan. So I think my initial attempts at fasting were a little bit misguided because I wasn't looking at the holistic aspect.
Thank you, Doctor. Could you bring me to the time when you had to share this information with your parents that you were fasting?
That's a really good question as well about sharing the information with my parents, because my parents came along to my shahada, so they already knew that I was fasting. So I did the shahada in the house of who's soon to be my brother-in-law and sister-in-law in Willesden Green in London. And I invited my parents there. I invited my soon-to-be wife and also my good colleagues and friends, Aisha Khan and Faisal Ahmed. So they were there for my shahada. I got my first prayer mats. And so my parents knew about I think they were a little bit uncertain about what was involved, but I think they were very much accepting of it.
So, Doctor, thank you for sharing with me how your family embraced Ramadan with you. In the year 1999, as we have mentioned earlier, the community or the society in Britain was not exposed to Islam or the idea of Ramadan as much as it is educated today. So could you explain to me how you dealt with people in a day-to-day in the year 1999 when they didn't know anything about Ramadan?
Yes, in terms of the lack of knowledge about Islam and what it involved in regards to fasting, I really didn't see at the time that it was my role to get people to be more educated about it. Because you have to bear in mind, I was still very much a new Muslim, a reborn Muslim as it was, but it was someone who's still learning the experiences about how to walk the path of faith. It was something whereby I kept the two roles very separate, Dr. Glenn Williams, Bilal Abdullah. So I learned a lot more from fellow Muslims. And I think that you have to bear in mind, though, for the first 2 years, as I said, I was a bit like an infant learning to walk. The thing is, then we had what was a bit of a landmark experience, which led to a lot of anti-Muslim sentiments, which was 9/11 in 2001. And that's where I was a lot more cautious about coming out about my faith as well. So we have to bear in mind that although there was ignorance, I would say, or lack of awareness from 1999 to 2001, people actually, and I would say curiously, wanted to understand about the faith of Islam post 9/11, which was curious because people were probably thinking to themselves, why would this happen? And I think you have to bear in mind that global events, like the ones that we've experienced more recently over the last 2 years, again have led to curiosity about faiths like Islam, but have also led to anti-Islam sentiments. So I've talked and written about Islamophobia as well. And I think this is the one thing that I needed to bear in mind, is that I've been a little bit cautious about how open I am, because although I'm proud of my faith, it's something whereby I think that it's incumbent on people to do some research and learn about people of various faiths. And I like to talk about my faith, but it's just from a position of people being curious rather than people thinking that I'm foolish or misguided. Because you have to bear in mind, I've done research into people who have converted to different faiths, and sometimes they get a lot of harassment, they'll get a lot of prejudice in other forms. Sometimes they'll get a lot of stress because of the things that they've done to take that step to convert to another faith. So I was trying to make sure that it's through self-preservation, that it was not me trying to proselytize to the masses and say, learn about Islam. I hope that I can do a lot more about showing what a good Muslim could be by setting an example, and to share with others who are curious as well.
Doctor, you said something so beautifully. I heard this quote that non-Muslims do not have the Quran. So their only lead or their only guidance to Islam is through your character and how you carry yourself. And I think that you exemplified that so beautifully. So thank you so much for sharing. Doctor, were there any emotional moments as an early Muslim when you went through Ramadan? Maybe it's a night in prayer. You know, when you told me that your earlier years of Ramadan may not have been the best, could you tell me that turning point where you felt this Ramadan was special?
It's interesting. I don't have to me that I can remember a long time ago, but I'd like to refer to times when we had the lockdown periods, because I really did have a lot more time to reflect and focus on ibadah, and to also look at the importance of family and human connections, as well as spiritually uplifting things. So fasting with my wife and breaking our fasts, it was a lot better then. It might seem a bit curious because a lot of people enjoy the iftar, so the post-fast meal, and enjoy doing so with lots of people. I'm not necessarily saying that I'm a private person. I do like the iftar, but it's not something that I've done as often as I probably could have done. So in terms of uplifting experiences for fasting, normally I would say it's more to do with being out in nature, focusing on the blessings that Allah has given us, and really just being a lot more mindful of that. The less I worry about the needs of my body, the more I look at the importance of meeting spiritual needs. Those kinds of days become really refreshing and energizing as well. So the more recent periods, as I said, where I'm starting to make sure that It's always about fasting plus ibadah, the better things are for me. As I said to you, that in the earlier years, whereby it was just trying to run a marathon, but with only limited resources.
So, Doctor, can you explain to me how Ramadan feels like in 2025 England compared to 1999 England as a whole?
So in 2025 England, I think people are a lot more focused on the importance of community. There have been a great deal of global events that have made us realize how fragile our existence is and how much we need to connect with others and meet the spiritual and community needs that we have. So you compare that with 1999. I think that for my own fasting, it was very much an individual thing. Whereas this year, I hope, inshallah, that it will be something whereby I can celebrate with family and friends, but also I can be mindful of those who are in need and what we can do for sadaqah and in terms of doing charitable deeds, not only in terms of money, but also time. So those kinds of the things, I think, are characteristic of 2025. It's a huge sea change, but I think it needs to be done because we need to be more solid as an ummah in terms of making sure that we are caring for each other, but also having outreach and making sure that people realize that Islam is a peaceful religion and one for hope as well.
So, Doctor, you said that the lockdown period was very spiritual, very reflective, where you had a deeper understanding within yourself of what Ramadan means to you in a private way. But could you share with me maybe funny moments or your learning process of discovering Ramadan, especially in the early years?
Well, I suppose the funny moments are more where I forget that I'm fasting and in the early days, and I'm just reaching for a cup of water that maybe a colleague has already poured out for themselves and about to drink, and then I go, oh, oops. So I think that's the thing. It's the holding back sometimes, making sure that I am mindful. If I'm slipping as well, and they go, oh gosh, why did I do that? Then again, it's a bit of an interrupt to my patterns of mindless behavior. So I think the one thing I'd say is to also, you're saying about the funny moments, it's one whereby it's not all grim. One thing I learned in the earlier parts of embracing Islam is that when I was in contact with people from the Anisa Society, which was a family support service for people in Islam, I learned that there's a lot more to do with celebrating what you can do, so more focusing on that rather than looking at what is haram. And so I've learned to smile, to look at the funny side of things. But as I said, it's trying to make sure that I do the next right thing.
So, Doctor, as an educator in a university, when I was in university, when I was experiencing Ramadan away from family in the UK, I had an Islamic society in my university, in the University of Birmingham, and they helped me through Ramadan. They shared food with me. We had Taraweeh together. We had Maghrib together. So, although I was born Muslim, living away from my family, Ramadan was very lonely, but the Islamic society in my campus really helped me. Is there any advice that you like to give individuals or brothers or sisters who are away from, living away from their family, who are students, who are working in a foreign land? Is there any advice that you'd like to share with them?
Very much so, yes. I think that's the point, that for some people, they might prefer to perform Ramadan by themselves, and that sometimes has been my intention. But I think that a lot of people, particularly from what is called a collectivist culture, like you've mentioned in Malaysia, everything is very much done together. I think that if you're a student or a worker working away from family, it's important to reach out to others who understand and can care for your well-being, but also how you can send out care and kindness to others as well. So I would say, in the case of the local area around here, we've got the Nottingham Malaysian community, which actually has a lot of people who are studying, who are working, who have not only those who are Malaysian, we have those who are part of the NMC, Nottingham Malaysian community, who are from Indonesia, Singapore, and they just like mixing with other fellow Southeast Asians. So I think it's important to find that community and to make sure that you're with others as well. So I think that it's great to have that brotherhood and sisterhood of people that are able to share those small kindnesses as well, to look in on each other. I think during this particular Ramadan, as it's coming up, it's important to make sure that it's very vital to see where you can look in on each other and just make sure that they know that you are thinking about them as well. I think also now we've got the social media age, people will be putting out a lot of messages on a variety of social media, sending out Ramadan best wishes, and then also as we get towards Eid as well. But I think the important thing is not to be stuck on one's phone, because that will then isolate oneself. So it's important to catch up with each other, particularly during as about the time to break fast with iftar, and if possible as well to check in with each other with the pre-dawn meal as well. But I think that it's very important for community, and I can see what you're saying there, that if people are feeling isolated, they're not alone during this challenging month of Ramadan.
So, Doctor, I only have two more questions for you. Is there any piece of advice you'd like to give someone who's experiencing Ramadan for the first time, or someone who's in the process of embracing Islam?
Yes. The first bit of advice I would give to someone who's performing Ramadan for the very first time. Now, this is a really challenging period, but also don't make some of the mistakes that I did. So the key thing here is to realize that Ramadan isn't just to do with refraining from eating and drinking. And it may be very difficult as well, for a variety of reasons, not to fast. It might be through medical reasons. It might be through the woman having a time of the month. It could be a variety of factors. So the important thing is to be kind and gentle to yourself, particularly for the first Ramadan. I would also say try and have a few trial runs, because it's a marathon. It's definitely not a sprint. So see if you can do some fasting for a few days every month, if possible, leading up to Ramadan. So that will give one's body a chance to get used to fasting as well, rather than this huge shock. The other thing as well, as I mentioned about not making the same mistake that I did, is making sure that you engage in some reading of the Quran, because that gives you some emotional and spiritual uplift as well. Making sure that you've got other people around you who can support you, talking to, in the case of people who are then reverting, talking to other fellow reverts may also be helpful, because then you can share some of the challenges. You can kind of be cheerleaders for each other on this marathon. And in terms of people thinking about the process of reversion, it's not something that is taken lightly. It's a very important decision. So the one thing I would say is do the kind of reading and talking with others to make you see whether or not it is the right decision for you.
So, Dr. Glenn, as a psychologist, as someone who specializes in religion and spirituality and the psychology of well-being and happiness, how can one, from your study, how can one maximize Ramadan?
In terms of maximizing Ramadan, one thing to bear in mind is a particular model of psychological well-being. There are 5 factors to psychological well-being. One is to do with positive emotions. The second one is to do with getting involved in something, really immersed in what you're doing. It's called engagement. The other one is to do with positive relationships. One is to do with meaning making, and one is to do with accomplishments. And Ramadan gives an opportunity for all of those things to come to the fore. So in terms of positive emotions, it's looking at what one can do to savor the what we can call the hedonic pleasures of what you're doing, in terms of just really enjoying a satisfying meal before the fast, the shuhur. And then also really enjoying the textures of the meal that has either been made for you or that you've made, in terms of savoring the taste, being more mindful about it. Those can evoke lots of positive emotions there. So in terms of positive emotions, that's one thing. In terms of engagement, think about getting really immersed in the reciting of your prayers, making sure that you get really engrossed in the recitation of the Quran as well. In terms of positive emotions, the third one is, positive relationships, the third one, that's something that's very crucial in terms of making sure that you're not doing it by yourself. In terms of meaning making, the fourth one of this PERMA model, the thing to bear in mind then is thinking about the significance of your fast for you on your life journey. And in terms of the A part, the fifth and final part of the PERMA model, it's looking at that accomplishment, that day by day in your 24 hours, have you managed to abstain from gossip, from thoughts which are not very healthy, or from doing things which can be counterproductive to your spiritual well-being. And if you've found that you've been successful in that 24 hours, then again, that's another notch for your showing that you're performing really good deeds. And then Allah, inshallah, will accept those good deeds and also accept your fast as well.
Inshallah. And Doctor, just one last question, this out of my own curiosity. Does fasting actually help our brain as a psychologist?
Well, I can say that fasting does help to some respect. It helps one's body. There's a lot of research to show that fasting can help to completely give the body a reset. In terms of helping the brain, you have to bear in mind that it depends on which time of the day. So people can be very alert, but then the drop in blood sugar in the afternoon means that I would advise to do things which are less mentally engaging in the afternoon, and that's more perhaps getting ready for the iftar. So it's really pacing yourself. Going back to the marathon metaphor, it's making sure that what you're doing is it can keep you alert at certain times so you can perform at your best. So in terms of good brain fitness, fasting can help, and I would say it's something that is very important to try and see if you can embrace for not only your physical functioning and also your spiritual functioning. But yes, I think that mentally it can be very good in terms of what you can do. But as I said, bear in mind what you're doing within that 24-hour window, because it might be that you're getting towards the end of that marathon in that day, and you need to give yourself a bit of a time out.
Dr. Glenn, thank you so much for sharing with us your stories. We hope and we pray that your stories inspire our viewers, and inshallah, we get to experience a very meaningful Ramadan. Doctor, I make dua that your Ramadan this year will be the best one ever, and inshallah, that you would have better, more inspiring Ramadan stories to share with people. Thank you again. Thank you so much again, Doctor. And inshallah, may we experience our Ramadan to the best of our abilities.